The rain didn't care about dignity. It fell anyway. Cold and relentless, soaking through her dress, plastering her dark hair against her cheeks like a punishment she hadn't asked for. Mara stood at the edge of the pack gathering, the grand autumn bonfire that lit up Ashwood territory every year, and she could not make herself move. Not forward. Not back. Just standing there. Watching. The fire crackled at the center of the clearing, throwing gold light across 100 werewolves who had come to celebrate. To eat. To dance. To witness. And at the heart of it all, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in all black like he'd been carved from the night itself, stood Selim Voss. Alpha of Ashwood. The most powerful man in 5 territories. And the man who had just finished announcing his chosen Luna to the entire pack. Her name was Isolde Crane. Daughter of the Eastern Alpha. Beautiful in the way that expensive things were beautiful, deliberate, polished, impossible to touch without permission. Isolde stood beside Selim with her hand curved around his arm, smiling at the crowd like she'd already memorized every face and catalogued every threat. The pack roared its approval. Mara didn't move. She was still hearing his words from an hour ago. Still feeling the shape of them in her chest, like broken glass she'd swallowed without meaning to. She is not suitable for what I need. That was what he'd said. Not cruel, exactly. Just final. He hadn't even looked at her when he said it. That was the part she couldn't stop replaying. Not the words. Not the dismissal. Not even the fact that he'd said it in front of his beta and 2 elders. He hadn't looked at her. Like she was furniture he'd decided to rearrange. Like she was a decision, not a person. Mara pressed her fingers against her sternum and breathed. She was 23 years old. A mid-ranked wolf from a mid-ranked family. She worked in the pack's records office, cataloging birth documents and territory agreements and ceremonial histories that most people had forgotten existed. She was not spectacular. She had known that. She'd always known that. But 6 weeks ago, Selim had come to the records office alone, without his guards, looking for a treaty document that predated his father's rule. And Mara had found it in 11 minutes because she knew those archives the way other people knew their own handwriting. He had looked at her then. Really looked. And something had shifted in the air between them, something wordless and heavy and terrifying. He'd come back the next day. And the day after. They'd talked for hours. About pack history, about the old wars, about the stories that never made it into the official records. About small things, too, her terrible habit of drinking cold coffee, his inexplicable fear of owls, the way the forest smelled different on the first day of each season. He'd laughed. She hadn't known alphas laughed like that, surprised by their own amusement, like joy kept catching them off guard. She'd started to think. Well. It didn't matter what she'd started to think. She lifted her eyes back to the bonfire. Selim was looking out at the crowd now, his expression composed and certain, the face of a man who had made a decision and intended to live with it. And then, just for a moment, his gaze moved. Found her, standing at the edge of the dark. Something happened to his face. Something fast and complicated and immediately controlled. He looked away. And Mara turned and walked into the rain and didn't look back. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that his wolf had been screaming since the moment she turned away. And it would not stop. Not that night. Not ever. Chapter 1. 3 weeks after the bonfire. Selim hadn't slept properly in 21 days. He stood at the window of his study at 4 in the morning, looking out at the dark forest, and tried to remember what it had felt like before. Before the weight behind his eyes. Before the constant, low-level ache at the center of his chest that he had no medical explanation for. Before his wolf had gone completely, stubbornly, infuriatingly silent. That was the part that scared him. Not the sleeplessness. Not the tension in his shoulders that wouldn't release no matter how long he ran in wolf form. Not even the way his temper had shortened to something almost dangerous. It was the silence. A wolf was never truly silent. Not in a healthy pack bond, not in a functioning alpha. His wolf had always been a constant presence, restless, powerful, occasionally inconvenient, but there. A second self he'd learned to negotiate with over 30 years of living. Now it was quiet. Pointedly quiet. Like someone had left the room and closed the door behind them. He turned from the window and crossed to his desk. The bonding ceremony between him and Isolde was scheduled for the winter solstice, 8 weeks away. It was a political necessity. The Crane Pack controlled the eastern water territories, and without their alliance, Ashwood's northern border became untenable. His father had spent 12 years building toward this merger. His council had spent 3 years vetting candidates. Isolde was the right choice. She was intelligent, composed, and utterly clear-eyed about the nature of their arrangement. She didn't expect romance. She expected partnership. That was, in many ways, more valuable. Selim told himself this regularly. His wolf said nothing. A knock at the study door. Come. His beta, Dario, entered looking like he hadn't slept either, which meant something was wrong beyond the normal brand of wrong. Dario was built like a defensive wall, broad, solid, and almost impossible to shake. When he looked uncertain, Selim paid attention. We have a situation, Dario said. With the Eastern delegation. Which kind of situation? The kind where Isolde Crane's second suggested this morning that Mara Ashby be reassigned. The air in the room changed. Selim kept his face still. Reassigned. To the northern outpost. Records management for the border patrol. Dario's jaw was tight. It's not an official request. More of a strong preference expressed over breakfast. Mara. Her name moved through him like a current. He hadn't let himself say it out loud in 3 weeks. He hadn't gone back to the records office. He'd stopped himself every time, firmly, deliberately, the way you stopped yourself from pressing on a bruise that was trying to heal. On what grounds, he asked, and was proud of how level his voice was. No stated grounds. But Isolde's second mentioned that certain pack members create unnecessary distractions. Dario paused. He looked directly at me when he said it. Selim's wolf stirred. Just barely. Like something turning over in deep sleep. But it was the first movement in 3 weeks, and it shot through Selim like electricity. No. The thought arrived fully formed, with an intensity that surprised him. Tell them the northern outpost assignment is not available, Selim said. Mara Ashby's position is essential to pack administration. She stays. Dario looked at him for a moment. That's going to. I know what it's going to do, Selim said. Tell them. After Dario left, Selim stood very still. His wolf was quiet again. But the silence felt different now. Less like an absence. More like a held breath. He didn't go to the records office. He told himself he wouldn't. He made it 4 days. On the 5th day, at 2 in the afternoon, he found himself standing in the doorway of the lower archive room, one of the oldest sections of the pack house, all stone walls and the smell of aged paper and cedar, watching Mara Ashby sort through a crate of documents that looked older than the building. She hadn't heard him. She was wearing a soft gray sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a knot that was fighting a losing battle, several strands escaping around her face. She had a pencil tucked behind one ear and another one in her hand, and she was talking quietly to herself as she worked, not words, exactly, more like sounds of concentration. Small, private noises she'd never make if she knew anyone was listening. Selim's chest did something complicated. His wolf woke up. Not slowly this time. All at once, rushing up from wherever it had been hiding, and the sensation was so sudden and so overwhelming that Selim actually put his hand on the doorframe to steady himself. Her. Not a word. More like a recognition. Like something clicking into place after weeks of being misaligned. Her. There. Finally. Mara looked up. The sound she made was small, just a quick inhale. Her pencil stilled. Her eyes met his and then moved away and then came back, like she couldn't decide which choice was safer. Alpha. Her voice was composed. Professionally composed, the kind that costs something. I need the Hartwell Boundary Agreement, Selim said. 1987. A pause. I can have someone bring it to your study. I'd rather, he stopped. I'd rather be here. He didn't say that. I'll wait. Another pause. Longer. All right. She turned back to the crates and began to move through the archive with the quiet efficiency he'd always found remarkable, the way she navigated that maze of documents like it was an extension of her own memory, every movement purposeful. He should go. He was aware that he should go. His wolf pressed forward, and Selim pressed back, and neither of them won. How are you? He asked. The words fell into the quiet room and just sat there. Mara's hands stilled for just a moment on a folder. I'm well, she said. Thank you. Mara. I found it, she said, and turned, holding out a folder. Her expression was perfectly, carefully blank. The Hartwell Agreement. 1987, please sign the retrieval form before you leave. She said it like she'd rehearsed it. Like she'd been ready for exactly this moment and had decided in advance what it would look like. Selim took the folder. Their fingers didn't touch. His wolf howled. He signed the retrieval form. He left. And for the first time in 3 weeks, the ache in his chest got worse instead of better. Chapter 2. Isolde Crane noticed everything. It was, she would have told you without embarrassment, her primary survival skill. She had grown up in a pack where her father's moods could change the temperature of a room, where alliances shifted faster than seasons, where the wrong expression at the wrong moment could cost you weeks of progress. She had learned early to watch, to catalog small things, the micro shifts in posture, the slight delays before answers, the direction of someone's gaze when they thought no one was looking. She noticed that Selim Voss smelled wrong. Not badly. Not in any way she could explain to someone who didn't know what they were looking for. But an alpha who had accepted his mate bond should have a particular scent, layered, settled, the wolf and the man aligned. She'd been around enough bonded pairs to know what it felt like to stand next to one. Like standing next to a fire that knew exactly what it was burning. Selim smelled like a fire that hadn't decided yet. She noticed this on their first evening together in Ashwood. She noticed it again the next morning at breakfast, and again at the territorial review meeting, and again at dinner when he sat beside her and was perfectly attentive and said all the correct things and looked at her with eyes that were present but somehow not quite there. She didn't say anything. She was patient. She had always been patient. She noticed that her second, Marcus, had made the suggestion about the records girl. She had not asked him to do that. But she also hadn't told him not to, which was its own kind of answer. And she noticed, very carefully, very precisely, that Selim had shut it down. Not with irritation. With certainty. That was the difference. An irritated response was about inconvenience. A certain response was about protection. Interesting, she thought, and said nothing. The morning Selim came back from the archives, Isolde was in the main hall reviewing the solstice ceremony schedule with the pack's head elder. She watched him walk through without stopping. His stride was the same, his expression was the same, but there was something underneath that hadn't been there before. Something unsettled. Something that looked, if she was being precise, like a man who had just remembered something he was trying to forget. Elder Thorne, ancient, observant, made entirely of patience and dry wit, waited until Selim had passed through and then looked at Isolde with his mild gray eyes. The bonding ceremony will require his wolf's full cooperation, Thorne said, as if remarking on the weather. I'm aware, Isolde said. It's been my experience, Thorne continued, returning to the schedule, that wolves are much harder to convince than men. Isolde looked at the schedule. Is there something you want to say to me directly, Elder? Absolutely not, Thorne said pleasantly. I'm simply a very old man who has attended many ceremonies. Some of them went exactly as planned. And the ones that didn't? He smiled, without looking up. Those were the more interesting stories. Isolde found her second in the East Corridor that afternoon. Marcus was efficient and loyal and occasionally too eager to manage problems before she'd had the chance to decide if they were problems. The records girl, she said, without preamble. Marcus straightened. I thought. I know what you thought. She kept her voice pleasant. Don't do things on my behalf that I haven't asked for. She's a complication. She's something, Isolde agreed. I haven't decided what yet. She studied the corridor wall for a moment, the old pack crest carved into the stone, faded with age. What do you know about her? Mid-rank family. Father died when she was 12. She was raised mostly in the packhouse system. No romantic record that anyone's bothered to document. She's been in records administration for 4 years. Marcus paused. They say she's very good at her job. Do they? They also say she spent 6 weeks meeting privately with the Alpha before the bonfire announcement. Isolde absorbed this. Did anyone know the meetings were happening? Not until after. She was quiet for a moment. Pull her pack file, she said. Bring it to me tonight. And if the Alpha notices? He won't, Isolde said. And then, softer, with an edge of something that wasn't quite cruelty but was adjacent to it, he's trying very hard not to notice things right now. She walked away. Behind her, Marcus hesitated. What exactly are you trying to figure out? Isolde didn't look back. Whether she's a threat, she said. Or whether she's leverage. Chapter 3. Mara had a system. When something hurt, she worked. When something hurt badly, she reorganized. In the 3 weeks since the bonfire, she had reorganized every archive room in the lower packhouse, recatalogued approximately 400 documents that had been misfiled sometime in the previous decade, and cross-referenced the entire border treaty database with the original handwritten records from the 1940s. It was, her colleague Pren had observed with concern, a lot of reorganization. I'm being productive, Mara had said. You reorganized the seasonal ceremony records twice, Pren had said. In 1 week. They were out of order. Mara. They're organized by color. Chromatic organization has historical precedent. Pren had looked at her for a long moment with the particular expression of someone who cared too much to push and too much to let it go. He came back, Pren said quietly. Mara had kept her eyes on the folder she was holding. I know. And nothing. She filed the folder. He needed a document. I provided it. That's the job. You look like you haven't slept. Neither does he, she said, and then immediately wished she hadn't, because Pren's expression shifted into something soft and knowing, and Mara couldn't stand being known right now. I'm fine, she added. Of course, Pren said, in the voice of someone who believed precisely the opposite. The dreams started the same night he came back to the archives. Mara didn't believe in fated mate dreams. She was a records keeper. She believed in documentation, in evidence, in things that could be verified. But she also knew, in the way that wolves knew things, the body knowledge that bypassed logic entirely, that what was happening to her at 3 a.m. was not ordinary dreaming. It was contact. Not full, not intentional, more like standing next to a wall and feeling the vibration of something enormous on the other side. A presence she recognized without being able to name it properly. Warm and vast and aching, like a frequency she could almost tune into. She woke up with her pulse high and her wolf pressing against her ribs. Her wolf was usually quiet. steady. Mara had always had a calm inner wolf, unhurried, grounded, the kind that settled into its environment without friction. Now it paced. Back and forth, urgent in a way she had no vocabulary for. Stop, she told it. It didn't stop. He chose someone else, she told it. He made it very clear. We are moving on. Her wolf sat down and stared at her with an expression that communicated, wordlessly but emphatically, that it thought she was lying. She went to see the pack healer. Not about the dreams, she wasn't quite ready to say that out loud. But about the pacing wolf, the sleeplessness, the low-level restlessness she couldn't shake. Ren, the pack's healer, was in her 60s and had the manner of someone who had heard everything and was surprised by nothing. Her room smelled of dried herbs and old wool and something faintly sweet that Mara had never been able to identify. She listened to Mara describe her symptoms without interrupting. Then she was quiet for a moment. Have you experienced something like this before? She asked. No. Any changes in your life recently? Significant events? Mara looked at the wall. Not really. Ren studied her. Mara. What? I'm a healer. I've been one for 40 years. She folded her hands in her lap. I know what a disrupted bond response looks like. The air went out of the room. Mara kept her face still, but something in her chest cracked open just slightly. I'm not bonded to anyone, she said. No, Ren agreed. But your wolf thinks it should be. A silence. That's not, Mara stopped. He chose a sold crane. The ceremony is in 8 weeks. I know. So whatever my wolf thinks it should be doesn't matter. Ren's expression was gentle in a way that only made things worse. That's not how wolf bonds work and you know it. Tell me what to do, Mara said, and was horrified by how her voice sounded, raw and undone and exhausted. Tell me something I can actually do. Ren was quiet for a long moment. You can wait, she said finally. You can give it time. Sometimes, when the pull isn't reciprocated, it fades. Sometimes, Mara repeated. Sometimes, Ren said, and didn't elaborate. She gave Mara a tincture for sleep and walked her to the door. And if you ever need to talk, Ren added carefully, about any part of this, my rooms are always open. Mara nodded. She walked back to her quarters. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. Her wolf pressed against her ribs, steady and certain and absolutely convinced of something that Mara did not have the energy to keep arguing with. He's not yours, she told it. Her wolf looked up at her with dark, calm eyes. And the look said, we'll see. But 3 floors up, in a study that smelled of cedar and cold coffee, a wolf that had been silent for weeks was pacing again. And every step was in the direction of her. Chapter 4. Selim ran. He ran every morning before dawn, deep into the ashwood forest where the trees grew so thick that even moonlight couldn't reach the ground. He ran in wolf form, gray-black, enormous, the kind of wolf that made other wolves instinctively step back, and he ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached and his mind finally, briefly, went quiet. It wasn't working anymore. He pushed harder, deeper into the forest, crashing through undergrowth that parted around him, leaping a frozen stream, climbing the ridge that marked the pack's inner boundary. His wolf ran with him but not with him. That was the distinction. Before, running in wolf form had felt unified, man and wolf moving as one, the way it was supposed to be. Now it felt like 2 separate things sharing the same body. His wolf ran, but it kept pulling. Northeast. Toward the pack house. Toward a specific room in the lower level. Toward her. He shifted back at the ridge. Stood in the cold morning air, breathing hard, human again. The pull didn't stop. It never stopped. It had been 4 days since the archive. 4 days since he'd stood in that doorway and felt his wolf lurch awake after weeks of silence. 4 days since he'd watched her hands on those documents and understood, with a clarity that terrified him, exactly what the silence had meant. His wolf hadn't been grieving. It had been refusing. Dario was waiting at the treeline with a thermos of coffee and the expression of a man who had bad news and had been rehearsing how to deliver it. Selim pulled on the shirt he'd left hanging on a branch and took the coffee. "The Elder Council wants a meeting," Dario said. "About?" "The bonding ceremony timeline." Dario paused. "And about you." Selim drank the coffee. It was too hot and he didn't care. "What about me?" "They've noticed the wolf silence." Dario's voice was careful. Steady. "Thorn, specifically. He came to me yesterday and asked directly whether you had completed the preliminary bond acceptance." The preliminary bond acceptance was a private ritual, quiet, internal, the alpha's wolf formally recognizing its chosen mate. It was supposed to happen within 2 weeks of the public announcement. It had been 3 weeks. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you'd been managing the northern border situation and that the ritual was being scheduled." Dario looked at him. "That buys you maybe a week before he starts asking you directly." Selim was quiet. "Selim." Dario's voice shifted, not beta to alpha anymore, but something older. They had grown up together. Run together at 12 years old, scared and exhilarated by their first shift. "Talk to me." "There's nothing to talk about. Your wolf has been silent for 3 weeks and came back to life the same afternoon you went to the archives." Dario waited. "That's not nothing." The cold air sat between them. "It doesn't matter," Selim said. "Your wolf disagrees." "My wolf doesn't run this pack." His voice came out harder than he intended. "I do. The alliance with Crane Territory is the only thing standing between Ashwood's northern border and 3 packs who have been waiting 15 years for a weakness to exploit. If I walk away from Isolde, I walk away from the treaty, and if I walk away from the treaty..." "I know the politics," Dario said quietly. "I've known them as long as you have." "Then you know I don't have a choice." Dario looked at him for a long moment. "An alpha without a true wolf bond is dangerous," he said finally. "Not morally. Physically. The wolf starts to separate. Decisions become unstable. Pack bonds start to fray at the edges." He paused. "Thorn knows this too. That's why he's asking." Selim said nothing. "Who is she?" Dario asked. Not unkindly. The name sat in Selim's chest like a coal. "Nobody," he said. "She's nobody." His wolf surged forward with a fury that nearly drove him to his knees. He steadied himself against a tree, hand braced on the bark, breathing. Dario watched him. "Right," his beta said softly. "Nobody." The elder meeting was that afternoon. 7 of them, seated in the old council room where every major pack decision had been made for 200 years. Stone walls. A fire that was always burning. The particular quality of silence that accumulated in rooms where serious things had been said. Thorn sat at the head of the table. He was 93 years old, technically. Pack healers kept careful records. He looked perhaps 70, a tall, angular man with silver hair and eyes the color of winter fog. He had been elder to Selim's father, and to his grandfather before that. He was the only person in the room who looked at Selim without deference. "Alpha," he said. "Thank you for coming." "Elder." Selim sat. "I understand there are concerns about the ceremony timeline." "There are concerns," Thorn agreed, "about several things." The other elders shifted slightly. Some of them looked at the table. "The preliminary bond acceptance should have been completed by now," said Elder Vasa, who handled pack law. She was direct, which Selim appreciated even now. "We are approaching week 4. "I'm aware." "The bond acceptance is not merely ceremonial," said Elder Moss, who was older than Vasa and more careful. "It's the formal alignment of your wolf with the chosen mate." Without it, the solstice bonding ceremony cannot be completed. I know what it is, Selim said. Then you understand our concern, Thorn said. Silence. There is a complication, Selim said, and the words cost him something. Nobody spoke. My wolf has identified, he stopped. Chose different words. There is an incompatibility. With the bond. I am working through it. An incompatibility with Isolde Crane? Vasa asked. He didn't answer that directly. I am managing it, he said. Thorn was watching him with those fog-gray eyes that had never once, in 30 years, missed anything. Selim, he said, the use of his name, without title, drew every eye in the room. How long have you known? A pause. Known what? That your wolf has already chosen. The fire crackled. The room was very still. That's not a conversation for this council, Selim said. It is precisely a conversation for this council, Thorn said, gentle and immovable. An unchosen alpha bond is a crisis. Not a personal matter. A pack crisis. He folded his hands. We are not here to judge. We are here to understand what we are dealing with. Selim looked at the fire. He had spent 3 weeks telling himself the same thing, that it didn't matter, that he was bigger than his wolf's instincts, that duty and love were not the same thing and duty was what he'd chosen. In this room, with 7 elders watching him, that story felt very thin. It changes nothing, he said finally. The alliance holds. The ceremony proceeds. Thorn looked at him for a long time. Very well, he said. But his eyes said something else entirely. Selim left the council room and walked directly, without planning to, toward the lower archive. He stopped himself at the top of the stairs. Stood there. His wolf was pressing forward so hard he could feel it in his teeth, in the tips of his fingers, in the place behind his sternum that hadn't stopped aching for weeks. No, he told it. His wolf pressed harder. She is not part of the plan, he told it. She cannot be. His wolf did not understand plans. It understood one thing, the pull. The recognition. The magnetic wrongness of being anywhere in the world that was not next to her. Selim turned around. Walked back upstairs. He made it all the way to his study. He sat at his desk. He lasted 40 minutes before he stopped pretending. Chapter 5. Mara Ashby's pack file was thinner than Isolde expected. She sat with it in the private reading room off the east corridor, a single lamp lit, the rest of the house quiet around her. Marcus had brought it without comment and left without being asked. She opened it. The basics first. Born 23 years ago, within Ashwood territory. Father, Edrin Ashby, mid-pack warrior, killed in the northern border skirmish when Mara was 12. Mother, Kara Ashby, née Winters, remarried and moved to a southern affiliate pack when Mara was 14. Left Mara in the packhouse system. Left her, Isolde noted. Not they were separated. Left. She turned the page. Academic record from the pack school system, unremarkable in most subjects, exceptional in pack history and territorial law. Assigned to the records office at 19 on recommendation from the head archivist, who had written in the margin of the placement form, extraordinary recall. Intuitive organizational mind. She will know more about this pack than any living person within 5 years. She was 23. That meant she'd had roughly 4 years. Isolde considered this. She turned another page. There was a wolf classification report from when Mara was 16, standard pack documentation, every wolf rated on the usual metrics. Strength, speed, sensory acuity, temperament. Most of the metrics were average. The sensory acuity score was not. It was circled, with a notation from the evaluating healer, unusually heightened scent perception. Recommend monitoring. Isolde closed the file and sat with it. She had expected, if she was being honest with herself, something more threatening. A trained fighter. A political family. Some claim on Selim that she'd have to work to neutralize. Instead she had an orphan who was very good at finding documents. And yet, why does he keep going back? She turned the file over in her hands. There was something she was missing. She could feel it, the way you felt a draft in a room before you found the gap in the wall. She thought about what Marcus had told her. 6 weeks of private meetings. All of them initiated by Selim. All of them ending before the bonfire night when he'd made his announcement. He went to her first, she thought. And then he chose me. And then his wolf went quiet. She was good at patterns. She recognized this one. The question was not whether Mara Ashby was a problem. The question was whether Isolde could use that problem, or whether it was going to use her. She found Mara the next morning. Not in the archives, in the narrow corridor outside them, carrying a stack of folders that came up to her chin. She was navigating by memory and the small gap beside her left ear that let her see roughly 6 inches of floor ahead of her. Isolde stepped into the corridor and said, "Let me guess. Hartwell Boundary Records?" Mara stopped. Slowly, carefully, she lowered the stack enough to see over it. She looked at Isolde with dark eyes that gave nothing away. "Crane solstice agreements, actually," she said. "Copies for the ceremony documentation." A beat. "I'm Isolde," Isolde said. "I know who you are. You're Mara." "I know who I am." Isolde almost smiled. Interesting, she thought again. Under stress, most mid-rank wolves deferred, softened their posture, dropped their gaze, added qualifiers to everything they said. This one didn't. "Can I help you with those?" Isolde offered. Mara looked at her steadily. "I'm fine. You can't see the floor. I've walked this corridor every day for 4 years. I know where the floor is." Isolde stepped aside. Mara moved past her. Isolde turned to watch her go, that stack of folders never wavering. "Mara," she said. Mara stopped. Didn't turn around. "I want you to know," Isolde said carefully, "that whatever Marcus suggested about reassignment, that was his idea. Not mine." A pause. "All right," Mara said. "I also want you to know that I'm not your enemy." Another pause. Longer. "All right," Mara said again, in a tone that communicated clearly that she had no intention of taking this on faith. She walked away. Isolde watched her disappear around the corner. She stood in the corridor for a moment, alone. She doesn't fear me, Isolde thought. And couldn't decide, even now, whether that was a problem or whether it was the most interesting thing she'd encountered since arriving in Ashwood. That evening, she found Selim on the west balcony. He was looking at the forest. He was always looking at the forest. She stood beside him without announcement, which she'd found he preferred over ceremony. "Tell me about her," she said. He was very still. "Isolde." "I'm not angry," she said. "I want to understand. That's all." He was quiet for a long time. The forest moved below them, dark and patient. "She found a treaty document in 11 minutes, he said finally. One that had been missing for 40 years. She just knew where it was." He paused. "I went back because I couldn't figure out how someone could know an archive that well. And then we talked, and I stopped thinking about the document." Isolde listened. "She knows this pack," he said. "Not the politics. Not the power structure. The history. The old stories, the reasons behind the laws, the things that happened before anyone thought to write them down. She talks about it like it's alive." He stopped. The silence stretched. "I made the right decision," he said. But he said it like someone pressing on a wound to check if it still hurt. It did. Isolde looked at the dark forest. She was good at cost analysis. It was another survival skill, looking at a situation clearly, without sentiment, and calculating what it would actually cost. What does it cost me if he never bonds properly? A failed ceremony. A fractured alliance. The political ground her family had spent years building. What does it cost him? She thought about what she'd read, what she'd heard, what she'd seen in 24 hours of watching Selim Voss move through his own pack. A wolf that wouldn't align. A chest that never fully expanded. A man living next door to his own life. What if, she said carefully, the right decision and the true decision are not the same thing? He looked at her. That's not something you should want to say, he told her. Probably not, she agreed. But I said it anyway. She went back inside. She left him on the balcony with the question and the forest and the wolf that was already, always, facing northeast. Chapter 6. Mara heard them. She hadn't meant to. She was in the upper archive room, a smaller space that most people forgot existed, directly below the west balcony, cataloging the crane ceremony documentation she'd been assigned as part of the solstice preparation. The window above her was cracked open. The voices drifted down. She recognized his first. She would have recognized it in a thunderstorm. She sat very still with a folder open in her lap and did not breathe and did not move and told herself to stop listening. She heard everything. She found a treaty document in 11 minutes. I went back because I couldn't figure out how someone could know an archive that well. And then we talked, and I stopped thinking about the document. She heard the pauses. She heard the weight in them. She heard Isolde say, what if the right decision and the true decision are not the same thing? And then she heard nothing, because they had moved inside. Mara sat in the small archive room for a very long time. Her wolf was completely silent. Not pacing. Not pressing. Just still. The way animals went still when they were processing something too large to react to immediately. She thought about the word true. She thought about 6 weeks of conversations in this building. About the way he'd laughed at the owl story. About the afternoon he'd come in frustrated about something he wouldn't name and she'd made him tea, badly, because she was terrible at tea, and he'd drunk it anyway and said it was the worst thing he'd ever tasted and then asked for a second cup. She thought about the bonfire. About she is not suitable for what I need. About his face when he'd found her at the edge of the dark. That fast, complicated, controlled thing he'd done with his expression. She had made a decision, in the 3 weeks since then. A clean, clear, documented decision. She had filed it under things that are finished and moved forward. She was now reconsidering the filing system. Stop, she told herself. She picked up the next folder. He made his choice. Isolde Crane is his chosen mate. The ceremony is in 7 weeks. This is not your life. She opened the folder. It was the Crane-Ashwood Alliance document. First page, first paragraph, this agreement, entered into for the purposes of territorial security and pack unity, shall be formalized through the bonding ceremony of Alpha Selim Voss and Isolde Crane, daughter of Alpha Darren Crane. She read it. All of it. She read it the way she read everything, completely, with the part of her brain that noticed not just what was written but what the writing revealed. And what it revealed was that this alliance was not optional. The border territories that Ashwood needed were written into this agreement as contingent on the bonding. If the ceremony didn't happen. 3 packs, she thought, remembering something Selim had said once, in a different room, in a different time. The 3 northern packs have been waiting 15 years for a weakness. She put the folder down. Her hands were very steady. This was not about what she wanted. This was not about what his wolf wanted, or what Isolde suspected, or what any of them felt in the dark hours of the morning. This was about 160 wolves who lived in Ashwood. Who had children here. Who had built their lives inside these borders. If the alliance failed, the northern packs moved. If the northern packs moved, Ashwood bled. She understood it completely. She picked the folder back up. She finished cataloging. She went home. She did not cry until she was in her own room with the door closed, and even then she was very quiet about it, because she had always been very quiet about the things that cost the most. But her wolf was not quiet. Her wolf sat in the center of her chest and stared at her with those dark, certain eyes and said, without words, something she was starting to understand despite herself. "This is not finished," it said. "This has not even properly started." 3 days later, everything changed. It started with a smell. Mara was crossing the main hall on her way to the Elder's documentation room when she caught it, faint, acrid, wrong. Not the kind of wrong that had a name. The kind of wrong that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct. She stopped. Turned. Followed it. It led her to the east corridor. To the door of the small reading room where she'd seen a light burning late several nights this week. The door was open a crack. Mara didn't go in. But she could see, through the gap, Marcus, Isolde's second, bending over a table, and on the table was something she recognized. Her pack file. And beside it, a smaller document, handwritten, not official, that he was copying from with quick, precise movements. Not into a pack system. Into a personal notebook. She stood in the corridor. Processing. Why would Isolde's second need to copy anything from my file into a private notebook? Pack files contained scent records. Bloodline maps. Wolf classification data. She thought about the notation from when she was 16. Unusually heightened scent perception. She thought about what information, exactly, could be pulled from a wolf's classification records. And then, slowly, she began to think about what someone could do with that information. She backed away from the door before Marcus looked up. She walked back to the archive. She sat down. Her wolf was not pacing. It was standing perfectly still, ears forward, watching. That, it said, is the problem. Mara picked up a pen. She started making notes of her own. The wolf had found what the man was trying to ignore. And now the records keeper had found what everyone else had missed. The question was, what was she going to do with it? Chapter 7. Mara spent 2 days being careful. She didn't confront anyone. She didn't change her routine. She arrived at the archive at the same time every morning. She catalogued the same documents. She signed the same retrieval forms and filed the same requests and nodded to the same people in the same corridors. She was very good at being invisible when she needed to be. But her mind was running. She knew what scent data could be used for. Every wolf had a unique scent signature, layered, complex, as individual as a fingerprint. In the pack's official records, that data existed for identification purposes. Healers used it. Border patrols used it. It was bureaucratic, benign. But scent data could also be used for something else. Something older. There were practices, documented in the histories Mara had spent 4 years cataloging, that used concentrated scent information to interfere with wolf bonds. Not break them. You couldn't break a true bond. But you could confuse one. Blur the edges. Create enough interference that a wolf couldn't clearly locate what it was reaching for. It was illegal under pack law. Had been illegal for 60 years, since the last alpha who'd tried it had lost his wolf entirely and spent his final years unable to shift. It was also, Mara knew from the histories, extremely difficult to detect. She needed to be certain before she said anything. She needed documentation. On the 3rd day, she went to the restricted archive. This was the section of the lower records that required elder authorization, old disciplinary files, historical wolf practice records, the documented cases of pack law violations going back 2 centuries. She had full access. Had always had full access. The head archivist had given it to her 2 years ago with the comment that the restricted archive would otherwise go unorganized until the end of time, and that Mara seemed to be the only person who understood that disorder was its own kind of destruction. She found what she was looking for in 40 minutes. A case file from 1961. An alpha in the Southern Territories whose beta had attempted to use extracted scent data to redirect a bond that was inconvenient for the pack's political direction. The method was detailed. The outcome was worse. The wolf in question, the one whose bond had been targeted, had not lost the bond entirely. But it had been pushed. Suppressed. Made to feel uncertain and directionless in a way that looked, from the outside, exactly like a wolf that simply hadn't chosen yet. Mara sat with the file. She thought about 3 weeks of wolf silence. She thought about an alpha who kept going to his window and staring at the forest. She thought about a scent she'd noticed, faintly, hanging in the air near the east wing, something underneath the normal pack smells. Sweet in a way that wasn't food. Chemical in a way that wasn't cleaning. She hadn't identified it at the time. She identified it now. She closed the file. She sat very still and breathed through the implications. This was not a small thing. If Marcus had been suppressing the alpha's wolf response, even partially, even clumsily, that was a violation of pack law serious enough to dissolve an alliance. Serious enough to strip him of rank. Serious enough to call into question everything Isolde had built since arriving. Including, Mara thought carefully, whether Isolde knew. That was the question she couldn't answer yet. And it was the most important one. She went to Pren. Pren was the only person in the pack house whose discretion she trusted completely, partly because Pren was deeply loyal and partly because Pren was constitutionally incapable of pretending not to care. She found her in the small break room off the main archive, eating lunch with the focused dedication of someone who had skipped breakfast. Mara sat down across from her and said, quietly, I need a favor. Pren looked up. Read her face. Put down her fork. What happened? I need you to tell me if you've noticed any unusual smells in the east corridor. Specifically near the reading room. Pren blinked. That's a very specific question. I know. Sweet? Kind of floral but wrong somehow? Like flowers left in water too long? Mara's stomach dropped. You've noticed it, she said. 3-4 days ago. I thought it was something in the cleaning supplies. Pren studied her. It's not cleaning supplies. No. Mara. Tell me what's happening. She thought about it. She thought about what happened if she told too many people before she understood the full shape of it. She thought about the alliance document she'd read, about the 160 wolves in this pack, about the fact that she did not yet know if Isolde was complicit. Not yet, she said. I need one more day. Pren looked at her for a long moment. You're going to do something that scares you, Pren said. Probably. Will it help him? Mara was quiet. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe. But that's not why I'm doing it. Then why? She looked at the table. Because it's illegal, she said. And because whatever I feel about any of this, about any of them, I've spent 4 years learning the laws of this pack. And the laws matter even when everything else is a mess. Pren picked up her fork. One day, she said. Then you tell me everything. Chapter 8. Selim was in a meeting with 3 territorial representatives when he felt it. Not gradually. All at once, like something snapping back into place after weeks of being wrong. His wolf surged. Not the muted, directionless pressing he'd been managing for weeks. Something full and urgent and oriented, pointing north, down, into the lower level of the pack house, with a specificity that made his hands go still on the table. The territorial representative from the east was mid-sentence about water rights. Selim heard none of it. Excuse me, he said. The representative stopped. Dario, who was standing at the wall, looked up. I need 5 minutes, Selim said, standing. He kept his voice level. Dario, please continue. He walked out. Down the corridor. Down the stairs. His wolf was running ahead of him, impatient, certain, pulling him forward the way a current pulled a swimmer, and for the first time in weeks he stopped fighting it. He let it lead. Down one flight. 2. Into the lower level, past the document rooms, past the old storage, into the part of the pack house that smelled of aged paper and cold stone, and, underneath all of it, something he recognized. Her. She was standing in the restricted archive with a file open on the table in front of her. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. Her expression shifted through 3 things in the span of a second: surprise, something unguarded, and then the careful composure she'd been showing him since the bonfire. She reached for the composure. He spoke before she could use it. What did you find? She looked at him. Then at the file. Then back at him. How did you know I found something? I didn't, he said. My wolf, he stopped. That wasn't a conversation he'd planned to have. He moved on. Tell me. She looked at him for a long moment. And whatever she saw made her decide. She turned the file so it faced him and slid it across the table. He moved into the room and looked at it. He read quickly, he had always read quickly. The 1961 case. The extracted scent data. The method of suppression. He looked up. You think someone has been doing this, he said. I think someone has been trying to, she said carefully. The result wouldn't be a full suppression. More of a blurring. A wolf that couldn't locate what it was looking for. The air in the room was very still. He looked at her. How long have you suspected? 3 days. And you didn't come to me. I needed to be sure first. She met his gaze steadily. I also needed to know whether it explained, or whether there was nothing to explain. That sentence landed in the space between them and neither of them moved. Does it? He asked. I don't know, she said. And then, quieter, I'm not a healer. I can't verify what your wolf has been experiencing. I can only tell you what the records say is possible. He looked down at the file again. A wolf that couldn't locate what it was looking for. 3 weeks of silence. Not refusal. Not grief. Something blurred. Something pushed just far enough out of reach that it kept grasping and finding nothing. And then the afternoon he'd come to the archive and stood in the doorway and felt it rush back with the force of something uncaged. Because he'd been close to her. Close enough that the blurring hadn't worked. He looked up. The scent of it, he said. What does it smell like? She didn't hesitate. Sweet. Floral but wrong. Like something preserved past the point where it should have been left alone. He went very still. He knew that smell. He'd been registering it at the edges of awareness for weeks, in the east corridor, in the reading room, sometimes faintly in the main hall. He'd categorized it as something belonging to the delegation, a perfume or a soap, one of those background details that didn't require attention. He'd been wrong. Marcus, he said. Her expression didn't change. But something in her eyes confirmed it. I don't know if she knew, Mara said. I need to find out, he said. He was already moving toward the door. Selim. He stopped. She hadn't used his name before. Not since before the bonfire. He turned. She was standing with her hands flat on the table, looking at him with those dark eyes that never pretended. Whatever you find out, she said carefully, the alliance still matters. The treaty is real. The northern pacts are real. She paused. I've read the agreement. I know what's at stake. He looked at her. You read the agreement, he said. It's my job to read agreements. Mara. Go, she said. Gently. Firmly. Like someone closing a door she decided needed to be closed. Deal with what you need to deal with. I'll still be here. He didn't know what to do with those words. He filed them somewhere deep and went. He found Dario first. Pulled him out of the meeting without explanation, walked him to the west stairwell, and told him everything in under 4 minutes. Dario's face did something complicated and controlled. If this is verified, he said, it's grounds for full expulsion of the Eastern delegation. I know. And the Alliance? I know. The Elder Council will need to be involved. After, Selim said. I need to talk to Isolde first. Dario looked at him. Are you sure that's? I need to know if she knew, Selim said. Before this becomes official. I need to know who I'm actually dealing with. A pause. Dario nodded. I'll find Marcus, he said. Quietly. Keep him somewhere he can't communicate with anyone until you've spoken to Isolde. Good. He was already moving. Isolde was in the east sitting room, reviewing the solstice ceremony order with 2 of her attendants. She looked up when Selim entered. Read his face. Dismissed the attendants without a word. He closed the door. They stood on opposite sides of the room and looked at each other. Tell me you didn't know, he said. She was quiet. Not long, 2 seconds, maybe 3. I didn't know, she said. He studied her face. He had learned, in the weeks since she'd arrived, that Isolde's tells were not in her expression. They were in her hands, the small adjustments, the way her fingers rested or stilled or moved. Her hands were completely still. But you suspected something, he said. Another pause. Shorter. I suspected Marcus had taken a step I hadn't authorized. She held his gaze. I didn't know what step. I told him not to act without my instruction. Her jaw tightened slightly. He did anyway. Do you understand what he did? Scent suppression is illegal under pack law, she said. I know exactly what it is. Your second committed a violation that could dissolve this alliance. I know. Isolde. I know, she said, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the composure slipped, just at the edges, just enough to see what was underneath. I know, and I am telling you that I did not order it, and I am telling you that I would not have, because I am not, she stopped. Breathed. I am not my father. Silence. The fire. He watched her. I believe you, he said. Something in her shoulders released. What happens now, she asked. Marcus is being secured. The Elder Council will convene tomorrow. He paused. The question of the alliance will be discussed. And us? He looked at her. Honestly, for perhaps the first time. She was remarkable. He had always known that. Intelligent, strategic, steady under pressure, the kind of partner a pack needed. The kind of partner he'd been prepared to commit to. But his wolf had never stirred for her. Not once. Not even now. I think, he said carefully, that you already know the answer to that. She was quiet for a long moment. I've known since the first night, she said. When your wolf didn't move toward me. A pause. I thought I could make it work anyway. So did I. She nodded once. Small and precise. The alliance, she began. I will find another way, he said. The northern border will be protected. I swear it to you, and to your father, and to your pack. He met her eyes. Whatever happens between us, I will not leave Ashwood defenseless, and I will not leave your family without what they were promised. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry. She was too controlled for anything else. But what was in them, briefly, deeply, was something that might have been relief. She's good, Isolde said. The girl in the archives. He didn't answer. She found it in 3 days, Isolde said. My own people didn't see it. Your elders didn't see it. She tilted her head slightly. She found it because she knows this pack better than anyone. Yes, he said. Quietly. That's not nothing, Isolde said. For a Luna. He left the room. His wolf was already moving. Chapter 9. The Elder Council convened the next morning. Mara wasn't there. She didn't expect to be. She had provided the documentation, the 1961 case file, her own notes, the timeline she'd reconstructed, and given it to Dario the previous evening, and then she had gone back to the archive and done what she always did when something was too large to feel all at once. She worked. She heard things, the way you heard things in a pack house, not through intention but through the osmosis of living in close quarters with 160 wolves who all had excellent hearing and not all of them were careful. She heard that Marcus had been confined to the East guest rooms. She heard that the Elder Council had been in session for 4 hours. She heard from Pren, who had heard from the kitchen staff, who had heard from a guard, that Isolde Crane had attended part of the session and spoken for 40 minutes without notes. She heard nothing about what was decided. She kept working. At noon, Pren appeared in the archive doorway with 2 cups of tea and an expression that suggested she was owed an explanation. Mara gave her one. All of it. Pren was quiet for a full minute after. What happens to the Alliance? She asked. I don't know. What happens to you? Mara looked at her tea. Same thing that was already happening, she said. Nothing changes for me. Mara. I gave them the information because it was the right thing to do. Because someone was breaking pack law inside this building and I found it and it needed to be reported. She set down her cup. I didn't do it because I thought it would change anything between him and me. I didn't do it for that. Pren was watching her carefully. But nothing. Mara. She looked at the table. He came to the archive, she said, very quietly. Yesterday. When I had the file. And for about 30 seconds, before I remembered all the reasons why it doesn't matter, he looked at me the way he looked at me before. Before the bonfire. Like I was. She stopped. Like you were what? Pren asked softly. Like I was someone worth looking at. The archive was very quiet. Pren reached across the table and put her hand over Mara's. She didn't say anything. Sometimes that was the right move. The Elder Council session ended at 2 in the afternoon. At 2:15, Dario appeared in the archive. He was not in his official beta capacity, no formality in his posture, no prepared words. He just stood in the doorway and looked at Mara with an expression she didn't have a category for. Elder Council will want your testimony, he said. Formally. About how you found it and what you found. Of course, she said. Tomorrow morning. He paused. You'll be recognized formally as the one who brought it forward. That goes into the pack record. That's fine. He was quiet for a moment. You've been here a long time, he said. In this archive. For years. And you know, he stopped. Started again. You know this pack? Yes. Better than most. Probably. He nodded. Once. Like a decision had been confirmed rather than made. The council is discussing the alliance question, he said. There are options being considered. Alternatives that don't require, he paused. Alternatives. She looked at him carefully. Alternatives that don't require the bonding ceremony, she said. Several were proposed this morning. He held her gaze. It will take time. Negotiation. Some concessions on both sides. But it's possible? It's possible. She absorbed this. And Marcus, she asked. Being returned to Crane territory. Today. Dario's voice was flat in the way of someone managing controlled anger. Isolde made the recommendation herself. She's distancing from him formally and publicly. That's smart of her. She's a smart woman. He looked at Mara. She also said something about you. In the session. What did she say? She said, he paused, and something at the corners of his mouth shifted. She said that a pack whose records keeper could identify an illegal wolf suppression practice within 3 days of it being deployed probably didn't need to be told what a Luna should look like. Mara stared at him. She said that, Mara said. In front of all 7 elders. Dario's expression was carefully controlled. It's in the session record now. Which means it's in the official pack documentation. He looked at the archive around them. Which I believe is your department. He left. Mara sat in the archive for a very long time. Her wolf had stopped pacing. It was sitting very still. Watching the door. At 5 in the afternoon, the door opened again. She didn't look up. She had promised herself she would not look up every time the door opened. She looked up anyway. Selim stood in the doorway. Not in his official capacity either. He was wearing what she privately thought of as his real clothes, dark, simple, without the weight of ceremony. He looked like someone who had been in a long and exhausting meeting and had come from it directly here. I heard your testimony is tomorrow, he said. Yes. Dario told you about the alternatives? He mentioned them. He stepped into the archive. She didn't stand. She stayed at the table, and he crossed the room and stopped at the other side of it, and they were separated by a table full of documents and 3 weeks of careful distance and everything they hadn't said. I owe you an apology, he said. The words were precise. They had been chosen deliberately and she could hear the weight that had gone into selecting each one. The way I handled things before the bonfire, he said. What I said. How I said it. You deserved, he stopped. You deserved better than that. She looked at him. I handled it the way I thought I had to, he said. I was wrong about what I had to do. I was also wrong about how I said it. The archive was very quiet. You said I wasn't suitable, she said. Yes. In front of witnesses. Yes. And now you're here. Yes, he said. He didn't try to qualify it. Yes. I'm here. She looked at the table. Selim. His name in her mouth felt like opening a window that had been painted shut. Why didn't you, before the bonfire? Why didn't you just say something? About what you were feeling? Why did it have to be? Because I was afraid, he said. She looked up. He was standing very still, and he was looking at her with exactly the expression she'd been trying to stop remembering, the unguarded one, the one that cost him something to show. I have never been afraid of anything in my life the way I was afraid of what I felt when I was in this room with you, he said. It wasn't the feeling itself. It was the size of it. He paused. I thought I could step back far enough that it would stop. Did it? No, he said. It didn't come close. She thought about 3 weeks of reorganized archives. About cold tea and chromatic filing systems and her wolf pacing at 3 in the morning. No, she said. It didn't. Something in the room shifted. Something large and slow and inevitable. Her wolf stood up. His was already there, she could feel it on the other side of the table, pressing forward, and she understood now what that warm vast presence in her dreams had been reaching for. The alliance, she began, is being handled. The northern packs. Dario and the council are working it. He didn't move from his side of the table. I made you a promise. Not out loud. But I made it. That the border would be protected. He held her gaze. I keep my promises. Even the ones you didn't say? Especially those. She was quiet. Her hands were flat on the table. His were at his sides. Neither of them moved. I'm still angry, she said. I know. About the bonfire. About what you said. About, her voice steadied. About being made to feel like I was a decision that needed to be corrected. You should be, he said. It's going to take time. I know that too. And I'm not going to pretend it's fine because your wolf has decided. I'm not asking you to pretend anything, he said. I'm asking you to let me try. A pause. I'm asking you to tell me there's still something to try for. The fire in the wall sconce flickered. The archive smelled of old paper and cedar and the cold coming in from the high window. And Mara looked at him across the table, this enormous, complicated, frightening, trying man, and her wolf sat quietly in her chest and waited. There's still something, she said. Not a flood. Not a capitulation. A door, barely open. He exhaled. It was the most human sound she'd heard from him in weeks. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. And they stood on opposite sides of the table in the small archive room while the afternoon darkened around them, and neither of them moved, and it was somehow the most significant thing that had happened in weeks. The wolf that had been begging finally knew what it was begging for. And it was patient enough to wait. For now. Chapter 10. Trust was not a door you opened once. Mara knew this. She had learned it at 12 years old, standing in the packhouse system with a small bag and no parents, learning that the people who were supposed to stay sometimes didn't. That the people who said we'll be here sometimes meant until it gets hard. She had rebuilt herself around that knowledge. Not bitterly. Not with walls, exactly. More like careful architecture. Everything load-bearing had been thought through. Every structure tested before weight was placed on it. So when Selim came back the next morning, not to the archive, but to the elder testimony session where she sat in front of 7 pairs of watchful eyes and documented everything she'd found, and he sat in the alpha's chair and listened to every word she said without once making her feel small for saying it. She noticed. She filed it. She did not make it mean more than it was. Not yet. The testimony took 2 hours. Elder Thorne asked most of the questions. He was precise and thorough and occasionally asked her to slow down when she referenced historical documents, which she did without irritation because she understood that precision mattered more than speed when something went into the official record. At the end, he looked at her for a long moment. You identified a practice that has not appeared in this pack in 60 years, he said. In 3 days. Working alone, without alerting anyone who could have intervened before you had sufficient evidence. Yes, she said. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Because suspicion without documentation is gossip, she said. And gossip in a packhouse is dangerous. Thorne looked at her. Indeed, he said. He made a note. She was dismissed. In the corridor outside, she exhaled slowly and let her hands shake for exactly 10 seconds because they had been wanting to shake for the entire 2 hours and she had not let them. Then she stopped. Rolled her shoulders. Walked back to the archive. Selim found her at noon. He brought food, which she did not expect. Simple things. Bread and sliced meat and 2 apples and a thermos of coffee that was, she noted, actually hot. He set it on the corner of her table without ceremony. You didn't eat this morning, he said. She looked at the food. Then at him. How do you know I didn't eat this morning? He had the grace to look slightly caught. Dario may have mentioned? You asked Dario if I'd eaten. I may have. She looked at the thermos. The coffee was from the good kitchen. Not the staff room. The one that required a code she didn't have. Thank you, she said. Carefully. Like someone trying a step on ice before committing to it. He nodded. He didn't leave. She looked at him. You can sit, she said. If you want. He sat. Not at the desk, on the low bench against the wall that she used for sorting large documents. It put him below her eye level slightly, which she suspected was deliberate. He was choosing a position that was not dominant. She ate. He drank coffee from the cap of the thermos. "The council has a proposal," he said, after a while. "For the northern border. A three-pack treaty, not a bonding alliance. Territorial agreements, resource sharing, a mutual defense clause." He turned the thermos cap in his hands. "It's less clean than the crane arrangement. But it's viable." "Who proposed it?" "Thorne." "When?" "This morning. During the session. He had it drafted before he walked in." Mara thought about Thorne's mild gray eyes and the comment about interesting stories. "He knew," she said. "Before yesterday. He already knew the bonding was failing and he had an alternative ready. Apparently. He's been an elder for 40 years. 60, actually." She shook her head slowly. 60 years and he still let everyone figure it out themselves. "He said something about that," Selim said. He paused, and something softened slightly in his expression. "He said that knowledge given too early is just interference. That some things have to be found before they can be fixed." Mara was quiet. She thought about 3 weeks of reorganized archives. She thought about following a wrong smell down a corridor. She thought about a case file from 1961 that had been sitting in a restricted drawer for 6 decades, waiting for exactly the right person to need it. "He planned this," she said. "I think he planned for the possibility," Selim said. And then was very patient. She looked at the apple in her hand. 60 years, she said again. "He's 93. He has time to spare." Selim almost smiled. It was the surprised kind, the one that caught him off guard. She remembered that smile. She filed it somewhere warmer than the rest. He came back the next day. Not with food this time. With a question, a genuine one, about a boundary notation in the old Hartwell Treaty that the new 3-pack agreement needed to reference. He needed the original document and its 1952 amendment. She found both in 7 minutes. He didn't leave for an hour. They talked about the boundary notation and then about the 1952 amendment and then about the broader history of how Ashwood's eastern border had been established in the first place, which was a complicated story involving a disputed river, 2 stubborn pack leaders, and an elder woman who had eventually gotten them to agree by refusing to cook for either of them until they did. Mara told that story because it was in the records and it was true and she liked it. Selim listened with his whole attention. At the end he said, "That elder woman should be in the official history." "She's not," Mara said. "She's in the handwritten notes. The official record just says the dispute was resolved by mutual agreement." "Why?" "Because history is written by the people who think they made the decisions." She closed the folder. "Not by the people who actually solved the problem." He looked at her for a moment. "Put her in," he said. "The official record? You're the archivist. You have amendment authority." He held her gaze. "Put her in." She looked at the folder. Then she reached for a pen. She wrote the elder woman's name, Edna Voss, no relation, just a pack woman who'd been tired of watching 2 men be ridiculous, into the official record. She signed it with her name and the date. She looked at what she'd done. Something small but solid settled into place. "There," she said. "There," he agreed. They found a rhythm. It was tentative at first. 2 people crossing a frozen river, testing each step. He came to the archive most afternoons. Sometimes with a legitimate document need. Sometimes, increasingly, without one. He always left when she needed him to. He didn't push. He didn't crowd. He was, she discovered, extraordinarily good at reading the air in a room, at knowing when she had hit a wall and needed space and retreating before she had to ask. She didn't know if that was the alpha training or just him. She suspected it was just him. She was still angry. She didn't pretend otherwise. Some days the anger sat in her chest like a stone and she was aware of it the entire time he was in the room, the memory of standing at the edge of the bonfire in the rain, the particular cruelty of being dismissed in front of witnesses, the 3 weeks of losing sleep over something that was never offered to her properly in the first place. On those days she was cooler. More formal. He accepted that without complaint. He didn't try to rush her through it. He just kept coming back. And slowly, the way ice melts, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the daily accumulation of small warm things, the stone in her chest began to change shape. One afternoon, 12 days after the testimony, he arrived to find her on a ladder. The high shelves of the restricted archive needed reorganizing. She had a system. The system required the ladder. The ladder was, objectively, fine. He stood below it and looked up at her with an expression she could only describe as involuntarily alarmed. "That shelf is 12 feet high," he said. 11.5, she said. "Mara. I have done this approximately 400 times. 400 times doesn't make it. Selim." She looked down at him. He was looking up at her with his hands slightly raised, as if he expected to need them urgently. "I am going to hand you these folders. You are going to hold them. And then I am going to come down and we are going to reorganize the top shelf and it is going to be fine." He looked at her. "Fine," he said. In the tone of someone who was not fine. She handed him folders. He held them with extraordinary care, as though they were either very precious or very explosive, and she was almost entirely certain the care was not about the folders. She came down. She took the folders back. "You were worried," she said. "I was cautious," he said. "You were worried about me." He didn't answer. She looked at him for a moment. The stone in her chest, she noticed, was considerably smaller than it had been that morning. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For being cautious." He nodded. His wolf was right there, she could feel it, warm and close, pressing gently against the space between them. Not demanding. Not the frantic urgency of the weeks before. Something steadier. Something that had learned to be patient. Her wolf stepped forward. Just a little. Just enough. Chapter 11. 3 weeks after the testimony. The pack house held a small, unofficial gathering, not a ceremony, just the regular monthly communal dinner that happened in the Great Hall regardless of politics or negotiations or visiting delegations. Mara almost didn't go. Pren convinced her. "You live here," Pren said, with the simple logic of someone who was tired of watching her friend eat alone in the archive. "These are your people. You have the same right to that table as anyone." Mara went. The Great Hall was warm and loud in the way that only happened when a lot of wolves were being deliberately relaxed about things. Long tables, mismatched chairs, food in the center that you were supposed to share and that most people did. Children running between adult legs. Older pack members occupying the same seats they'd occupied for 30 years. She found a place near the middle and sat with Pren and a few of the other archive staff and told herself she was not watching the door. She was watching the door. He came in 20 minutes after the meal started. Without the formal posture. Without the entourage. Just Selim and Dario and the easy movement of someone who had grown up at this table and knew every face in the room. He found her immediately. She was certain he didn't mean it to be obvious. It was obvious. Dario, she noticed, looked at the ceiling. Selim sat at the far end of the hall with the senior pack members, which was where an alpha sat at communal dinner, and she did not look at him and focused very deliberately on the conversation Pren was having about the new filing system. She lasted 45 minutes. Then the bench shifted beside her and he was there casual, as though he'd simply run out of space at the other end and this was the nearest available seat, and he said, "Pren, I hope you don't mind," and Pren said, "Of course not, Alpha," in the voice of someone who had been hoping for exactly this. He sat. They were close in the way communal benches made you close, shoulders nearly touching, his arm along the table beside hers, the warmth of him immediately present. Her wolf went absolutely still. Not frozen. Not alarmed. Settled. Like something that had been waiting to exhale. You came, he said quietly. Pren was persuasive, she said. Pren is always persuasive. He reached across the table for the bread without thinking, and the movement brought his forearm against hers, a second of contact, warm and incidental. Neither of them moved away. He set the bread down. Didn't move his arm. She didn't move hers. The dinner went on around them. Noise and warmth and the particular chaos of communal eating. Nobody was watching them specifically. Or if they were being careful about it. Mara was aware of exactly 1 square inch of her forearm. The 3-pack treaty had its second review today, he said. Normal conversation. Something they could both hold. How did it go? Better than the first. The West Bank territory notation is still contested, but Thorne suggested language that both sides found acceptable. What language? He called it shared seasonal access rather than divided rights. He paused. 2 words. Changed the entire emotional weight of the sentence. That's what language does, she said. A word is never just a word. He turned his head slightly toward her. No, he said. It isn't. The sentence landed in 2 places at once. She looked at the table. Selim. Mara. We're at the communal dinner. I know where we are. Half the pack is in this room. I know that too. She looked at him. He was watching her with that expression, the real one, the one that cost him something. I'm not going to pretend, he said quietly. Not here, not anywhere. I did enough of that. He held her gaze. If that makes people talk, let them talk. They've been talking anyway. She knew that was true. She'd heard them. The careful conversations that stopped when she walked past. The looks. Not unkind, mostly more curious. The pack trying to understand what was happening in real time. What are they saying? She asked. That the alpha finally figured out what he had, Pren said cheerfully from directly across the table. Mara stared at her. Pren ate a piece of bread with sublime innocence. You were listening this whole time, Mara said. I live in a pack house, Pren said. I listen to everything. It's a survival skill. Selim, to his credit, did not laugh. He did press his lips together in a way that suggested significant effort. Mara looked at the ceiling. And then, despite everything, despite 3 weeks of careful architecture and measured steps and a stone in her chest that had been slowly dissolving, she laughed. Not performed. Not careful. Real. It came out of her like something long held, warm and genuine, and she felt it in her whole chest. Beside her, Selim went very still. She turned and found him watching her with an expression she had no file for. Something open. Something that looked, for a man who had spent 30 years being alpha uncertain and in control, almost stunned. What? She said. Nothing, he said. But his voice was different. Lower. Like something had shifted. What? She said again. I haven't, he stopped. I've been in this hall my whole life and I don't think I've ever heard it sound like that. She didn't know what to say to that. So she didn't say anything. She just held his gaze in the warm, noisy hall, and her wolf settled deeper into her chest like it had finally found the exact right temperature, and something between them that had been thin and careful began, slowly, to thicken into something real. Later. The dinner wound down. People drifted away in groups, talking, carrying dishes, resuming the ordinary business of pack life. Selim walked her back. Not to her quarters, just through the hall and down the east corridor, the direction she'd said she was going. He walked beside her at a pace that matched hers exactly, unhurried, and she was aware of how large he was and how gently he moved and how her wolf had not been this quiet in months. At the turn in the corridor where she went left and he went right, they stopped. The corridor was empty. The wall sconces threw soft light. "I want to tell you something," he said. "All right." He looked at her. "Before the bonfire," he said. "In the weeks when he paused. When we were here together. In this building. I remember. I want you to know that I was not performing anything. I was not testing you or evaluating you or deciding something about you." He held her gaze steadily. "I was just here. With you. And it was something I didn't have a category for." He stopped. "I didn't handle what came next well. But what happened in those weeks was real. I want you to know that." She was quiet. The corridor held them. "I know it was real," she said. "I was there." He nodded. She thought about reaching forward. She didn't. Not yet. But she reached sideways, the smallest movement, and her fingers rested against the back of his hand. Not a hold. Not a grasp. Just contact. Warm and deliberate and chosen. His hand turned slightly. His fingers curved. Not grabbing. Receiving. The touch lasted 10 seconds. She stepped back. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She walked left. He stood in the corridor and she could feel his eyes on her back and her wolf stretched out in her chest like a cat in sunlight. She turned the corner. Pressed her back against the wall. Breathed. Her hand was warm where she'd touched him. Her wolf made a sound that was not quite a word, more like a note. A single, certain note. "Yes," it said. "That." She didn't sleep. Not from pain this time. From something that felt like standing at the edge of something large and looking out and feeling, for the first time, like the size of it was not a warning. It was an invitation. 3 floors up, Selim stood at his window. Looking north. Not with the aching urgency of before. Not the blurred reaching of a wolf that had been interfered with. With clarity. His wolf stood beside him, with him, not separate, and they both looked in the same direction at the same time. For the first time in months, they agreed. Chapter 12. The morning of the Elder Council's final ruling on the alliance question arrived cold and clear. Frost on the windows. The forest stark and silver in the early light. Mara dressed carefully, not differently than usual, but with attention. She braided her hair properly instead of the defeated knot. She wore the dark green she usually saved for ceremonies. She told herself it didn't mean anything. Her wolf told her to stop lying. The council ruled at 9 in the morning. The 3-pack treaty was formally approved as the replacement framework for Ashwood's northern border security. The Crane-Ashwood bonding alliance was dissolved by mutual agreement, a phrase Thorne had chosen with great care, because it was accurate, and because it placed no fault on either party, and because Isolde Crane had earned that much. Marcus was formally expelled from the Crane delegation and his case referred to the Interpack Tribunal for the bond suppression violation. Isolde would return to Crane territory within the week. The pack was informed by official announcement at the midday gathering. Mara heard it from the back of the crowd. She watched Selim stand at the front of the hall and address his pack with the composure of someone who had spent 30 years learning how to be steady when steadiness was required. He was precise and clear and he answered questions without deflection. At no point did he look at her. She understood why. This was his pack. This was his announcement. This was a moment that belonged to the formal structure of things, not to whatever was growing quietly in the corridors and archive rooms. But when the gathering ended and the crowd began to move, he looked at her. Just once. Across the whole length of the hall. Just a look. But it said everything that the formal words hadn't. Isolde left 2 days later. Mara didn't expect the knock on the archive door. But there Isolde was composed, dressed for travel, her posture perfect and her eyes clear. "I wanted to say goodbye," Isolde said. "You didn't have to," Mara said. "I know." Isolde stood in the doorway. "I wanted to." A pause. Mara looked at her, really looked. This woman who had come here to build something that the ground wasn't prepared for. Who had been placed in an impossible position by her own second. Who had handled all of it with more dignity than Mara would have managed. "I'm sorry," Mara said. "For the parts of this that weren't fair to you." Isolde looked at her steadily. "None of this was your doing," she said. Still. Isolde was quiet for a moment. "You know what I've been thinking about," she said. "The treaty my father built. The one that was supposed to come through the bonding. What about it? My father assumed the bonding was the only way. The only possible structure." She tilted her head slightly. Thorne found an alternative in one morning. One morning of actual thought. She paused. "I keep wondering how much time we waste assuming there's only one way." Mara thought about this. "The three-pack treaty might actually be more stable," she said. "No single point of failure." That's what Thorne said. Something moved in Isolde's expression, dry, wry, not quite a smile. 93 years old and he's still the sharpest person in any room he enters. "He has 60 years of practice," Mara said. Isolde laughed, genuine, surprised, brief. It was the first time Mara had heard her laugh. She looked different when she laughed. More like herself, Mara thought. Whoever that was underneath all the composure. "Take care of this pack," Isolde said. Her voice was back to steady. "And take care of him. He carries a great deal alone." "I know," Mara said. "I suspected you did." She left. Mara stood in the archive doorway and watched the corridor empty. She thought about one way. She thought about 12-year-old Mara with a small bag and no parents, learning that the people who were supposed to stay sometimes didn't. She thought about what it meant to choose to stay, not because you had no other option, but because you had looked at the full weight of something and decided it was worth holding. She went back to her table. She picked up a pen. She started writing. He found her that evening. The archive was dim, lit by the desk lamp and the last of the afternoon through the high window. She was still writing, not documents, not official records. Something for herself. She closed the notebook when she heard him. He stood in the doorway. "She's gone," he said. "I know." He crossed the room and sat across from her. Not on the bench this time. At the table. Across from her, eye level, close enough that the lamp lit both their faces. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "Is this, what's been happening between us, is it enough? What I've given you so far? Is it enough to build on?" She looked at him. He was holding himself still in the way that meant he was braced. Not for rejection, exactly. More like someone standing in a doorway who wasn't sure the floor on the other side would hold. She knew that feeling. "It's a start," she said. Something in him released. "A start," he said. "A real start," she clarified. "Not of a cautious acquaintance. Not a careful friendship." She held his gaze. "I mean an actual start. With the real possibility of where it goes." "Yes," he said immediately. "That's what I want." "Then there are things I need," she said. "Tell me." "I need you to say what you mean when you mean it. I've spent enough time reading between lines." She kept her voice steady. "If you feel something, say it. If something's wrong, say that too." "Yes," he said. "I need you not to make decisions about me without including me in them." "Yes. And I need," she paused. "I need you to understand that I am not the same as what you almost chose. I am not a political arrangement. I am not a convenience. If this is what it is, her voice was very steady. Then it's because we both chose it. Every day. He looked at her. Every day, he said. Yes. She breathed. Her wolf was standing up inside her chest, tall and certain, and finally letting itself be sure. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. He reached across the table. His hand was large and warm and turned palm up in the space between them. An offer. An honesty. She looked at it. She looked at him. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed, gently, completely, the way you held something you understood the value of. Her wolf made that sound again. The note. Except this time it wasn't a single note. It was the beginning of something longer. He didn't let go for a long time. Neither did she. The archive lamp burned between them and the night came in through the high window and the pack moved around them in the warm, living way of 160 wolves going about their lives. The records, she said, after a while. What about them? Someone should document this part. She looked at their joined hands on the table. The actual story. Not just the official version. Will you? Probably. She looked at him. I tend to include the people who actually solved the problem. He almost smiled. Then he did. The real one. The surprised kind. Then include yourself, he said. You're the one who found it. I found a file, she said. Mara. He held her gaze. You found more than a file. She looked at him. She thought about that. She thought about what it meant to be found, not as a decision, not as a political consideration, not as not suitable. But as someone worth crossing a room for. Worth coming back to. Worth saying the true thing out loud in front of 7 elders and a communal dinner and an empty corridor and a lamplit archive table. So did you, she said quietly. His hand tightened around hers. Just slightly. Just enough. Outside, the ashwood forest was silver and still under the first heavy frost of the season. And the wolf that had spent months begging, for recognition, for alignment, for the specific impossible warmth of her, finally went quiet. Not the silence of suppression. Not the silence of defeat. The silence of a wolf that had found what it was looking for. And knew, with every certainty it possessed, that it was not going to lose it again. 6 months later. The spring archive reorganization was Mara's favorite project of the year. It was a considerable undertaking, 3 days of pulling every document that had accumulated over winter, checking for damage, updating cross-references, integrating new materials into the existing system. She had helped this year. She had not asked for it. It had simply appeared on the first morning, in the form of Selim Voss sitting at the secondary table with his sleeves rolled up and an expression of genuine willingness that was only slightly undermined by the fact that he had already misread the filing system once and put 6 documents in, entirely the wrong decade. I told you, she said, removing 1987 from the 1940s section without comment. I thought it was organized chronologically from. It's organized by territorial category first, then chronology within each category. That's not obvious. It's completely obvious if you read the guide I posted on the wall. He looked at the wall. There was, indeed, a guide. I will read the guide, he said. You will read the guide, she confirmed. He read the guide. He did not put anything in the wrong decade after that. They worked through the morning. The archive filled with the quiet sounds of paper and organization and the occasional question, him asking, her answering, both of them occasionally wandering into tangents about the documents themselves, which was what happened when you put 2 people who were genuinely curious about pack history in a room full of pack history. At noon, Dario appeared with food that nobody had asked him to bring. He set it down, looked at the 2 of them, and left with the expression of a man who had been waiting for this for approximately 6 months and was experiencing a quiet personal victory. He's insufferable when he's smug, Selim said. He's earned it, Mara said. Unfortunately. She handed him an apple. He took it. Their hands didn't linger this time, the touch was easy now, ordinary, the kind of contact that didn't require acknowledgement because it had become part of the natural language of being near each other. She had noticed when it shifted. Had not marked it formally. Had simply registered it. Filed it somewhere warm and kept moving. The official pack record from the winter, which Mara had compiled and submitted to the Elder Archive, read as follows. The Crane-Ashwood Bonding Alliance, dissolved by mutual agreement following violations committed by Crane delegation member Marcus Holt, was replaced by the Northern Three-Pack Territorial Treaty, brokered by Elder Thorne and ratified by all parties. The treaty provides Ashwood with equivalent border security through a distributed framework, with the additional benefit of shared resource access. Pack archivist Mara Ashby is credited with identifying the bond suppression violation that prompted the investigation. Her work is entered into the official record with commendation. Alpha Selim Voss formally initiated courtship proceedings with Mara Ashby in the 53rd day following the dissolution of the prior arrangement. The courtship was accepted. The bonding ceremony is scheduled for the summer solstice. It was precise. It was accurate. It was, as official records went, complete. But in the margin, in handwriting that was recognizably not archival, someone had added. She found the answer in 11 minutes. She found everything else in considerably longer. Some things take the time they take. CV. Mara had read that annotation 6 times. She had not removed it. It was, she had decided, part of the record. That evening, they walked the inner forest together. This had become a habit, not every day, but often. The path along the eastern treeline where the pines grew oldest, where the forest floor was soft with decades of needles, where the pack boundary markers stood weathered and permanent at intervals. She had been a records keeper long enough to know that the boundary markers were not just territorial. They were memory. Every one of them placed by someone who had decided, here. This is where we hold. This is what we protect. She walked beside him in the last of the evening light and felt her wolf moving with her, easy, aligned, the way it had always been meant to move. Ren asked me something today, she said. What? She asked if I was nervous. She glanced up at him. About the summer ceremony. Are you? She thought about it. Honestly. She thought about 12-year-old Mara with a small bag. About 3 weeks of chromatic filing systems. About rain at the edge of a bonfire and a face that did something complicated and controlled. About a thermos of hot coffee placed on a table without ceremony. About a hand turned palm up in the lamplight. No, she said. He looked at her. Certain, he said. Certain, she said. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. The forest moved around them, soft and silver-green. I'm going to spend a long time, he said carefully, making sure the distinction between those two things never gets blurry. She looked at him. He was watching the treeline and his jaw was set and he meant every word in the precise, deliberate way she had come to understand was simply how he was when something mattered enough to be said correctly. She reached sideways. Her hand found his. He took it without looking, reflexive, easy, certain. They walked. The boundary markers stood in the evening light, worn and patient, holding the line between what was known and what lay beyond. Some bonds are chosen. Some are inherited, or arranged, or imposed by politics and necessity. But the ones that endure, the ones that become part of the record, written in the margins and the official lines both, are the ones that were earned. Day by day. Archive by archive. One returned look, one hot cup of coffee, one palm turned upward in the lamplight at a time. The wolf had known from the beginning. The man had taken longer. But he had found his way. And the girl who had spent 4 years learning that the people who were supposed to stay sometimes didn't. Had found someone who came back. Every time. Even when it cost him something. Especially then. This story belongs to the record now. All of it, the official parts and the margins both. Just the way it should be. End. What part stayed with you the most? Was it the moment across the table, the touch in the corridor, or the note written in the margin of the official record? Drop it in the comments, and if this story found you at the right time, you already know why.